What's going on, Bridging the Gap?
Hey, everybody.
All right, guys, we're going to pick up with part two of why black folks are struggling in America. And my wife has told me I can't harass her on this one, and I got to go straight into the information so we don't keep you too long.
But does he look handsome in his suit today?
Oh, look at you.
See?
Thank you, babe. You always look good, so you know that. What were you going to say?
I forgot.
You got another compliment or something? All right. So in that last video that we did, we shared a couple of clips of Martin. Martin. I almost said Malcolm. We're gonna call that speech that he gave about how the government would not undergird its black peasants versus undergirding its white peasants. We're gonna call that the Two Americas speech, right? When we were putting it together, that video, Cheryl and I came to realize that Martin gave that speech in May of '67. He was gone in April of '68, less than 12 months later. I say that to say this. We thought about that then, but we just watched a video that we're going to give you guys a clip to of Byron Allen on the Breakfast Club recently. And Byron Allen said that he bought the rights to Coretta Scott King's story, Martin's wife. And she said, they killed my Martin over the Two Americas speech. It was not the I Have a Dream speech that they killed him for. It was over him identifying these two Americas. So we wanted to point that out. Now we're going to talk a little bit about those two Americas in the not too distant past. And the next video will be like, what do those two Americas look like today? Because there's still two Americas, believe it or not. And the clip that Byron Allen that we're going to share with you guys, if you don't believe there's two Americas, watch this clip. Matter of fact, if you are black and you live in America, you absolutely need to watch this clip, the whole thing. It's an hour and 15 minutes long. And if you don't watch it, don't blame nobody. Okay?
And we'll put a link to the video in the description because it's about an hour long, but it's worth every minute.
Every black person in America, if you enjoy any level of freedom in this country, you need to watch that video. You need to pay attention because there's some stuff going on. We'll talk about it more in the next video, but there's some stuff coming down the pipe in the next week and a half, literally in the Supreme Court that you need to be aware of if you're black and in America. So with that, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about this period of, between slavery to the civil rights era. And we talked about how every time we try to come together, we win. When we fight, we win. And we mentioned in the last video the extremes that they've gone to prevent that from taking place. So we're just going to give you a few examples. Some you may be familiar with. I'm guessing probably one you're familiar with and a couple that you're not. And then we're going to talk a little bit about redlining. Because I'm sure people have heard that phrase, but not many people really know what redlining is. So we want to talk about that, and then in the next video, we'll see how all of this stuff that we're going to talk about now is really still taking place today. All right? So what's first?
And I think, too, I want to say before we get in to sharing the clips here, that it's important to realize, you mentioned that these things are still happening today, because as we show this stuff, and some of the pictures might be a little graphic, and we'll warn you when one is coming, but there's so much that's still going on that we can't think about, well, this was back then and it wouldn't happen today, because it very well could happen today.
And when you see what's coming down to the Supreme Court here in the next week or so, it could happen real quick. The stuff that you're gonna be looking at on this screen could be taking place like that if it goes the way they want it to. So watch the clip. Please watch the clip. So we want to start with an event that took place in the summer of 1919. They called it Red Summer. You see here, it shows a bunch of service members, black service members, saying when we return from fighting, we return fighting. W.E.B. Du Bois, who, by the way, died in Accra, Ghana. But black folks who went to war for this country came home with a different mindset. Okay, it's time to fight for us now. It's time to get our stuff together. So as we as black people attended to do that, and it says here, African Americans have returned home from the war with a new and contagious confidence and assertiveness, which in most scenarios, you would say that those are two good attributes for people to have. Be confident and assertive. So what did that mean? That meant that we as a people in America were really trying to do what everybody says we should have done all along, and that is pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, as we mentioned in the last video, that when we do that, there's always some extreme that they will go to prevent it from working for us, because as we said, when we fight, we win. So we want to show you a little bit of what that looks like with the Red Summer. Anti-black riots, 25 major American cities. I'm just going to read the little excerpts on the left. Black veterans especially were targeted by white mobs and police who used racist violence to maintain the racial hierarchy. White mobs intent on protecting their economic and social dominance from growing communities of black workers attacked black communities, destroyed property, and killed or injured hundreds of black people. Red Summer was, as you can see, all across the country. There were at least 25 major cities where, over economic issues and situations, white mobs went nuts and killed a gang of black folks. We want to isolate one of those scenarios for you and let you see what this is really about. Here. That would be the lynching in ELAINE, Arkansas. And we're gonna share this next picture with you so you can see what actually took place there, but it is graphic. So we're gonna actually give you a second. If you'd rather not see it, speed up this tape or walk away, turn it off, do whatever you need to do. This is some graphic stuff that you're gonna see, but it happened, so we're gonna show it. Sharecroppers lynched in 1919 in ELAINE, Arkansas. In 1919, after the World War I ended, black sharecroppers in Arkansas began to unionize. This attempt to form unions triggered white vigilantism and mass killings that left 237 black folks dead. I'm going to read you just some excerpts out of this article that I'm looking at. It says, one man by the name of Carter explained how he cultivated 90 acres of cotton and then had his landlord confiscate the crop and all of his possessions. Another black farmer from Ratio, Arkansas, said a plantation manager would not give sharecroppers an itemized record of their crop. No one realized that within a year of a meeting with this attorney to discuss this, that one of the worst massacres in United States history would take place. What happened was they wanted to put together a union. They became members of a new union, the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America. The new union was founded by a black Delta native named Robert Hill with no prior organizing experience. All Robert Hill had going for him was his ambition, again, assertiveness and confidence. Mr. Hill said the union wants to know why it is that the laborers control their just earnings, which they work for, as he asked black sharecroppers each to persuade 25 new members to join. So that is what they were trying to do. They were figuring, look, these guys are basically robbing us. They're taking advantage of us, and we don't have anything. How do we stop it? We got to come together and unionize. Then it goes on to say, white elites of the region understood that the only way they could maintain their economic prosperity was to exploit black sharecroppers and laborers. Let me skip down. The sharecroppers braced. Oh, here's what happened. One white dude came to a union meeting to disrupt things. Some violence broke out. He was shot and killed. So the sharecroppers knew there was going to be a problem. So sharecroppers braced for reprisals that were sure to come and formed self-defense forces. The local sheriff, Frank Kitchens, deputized basically the whole town. A large white militia that was headquartered at the county courthouse. In the end, 237 black people were killed because they wanted fair compensation for the crops that they harvested. Listen to this. No one was ever charged or any trials held for anyone that took part in the mass lynchings. The basis for these heinous crimes was the reassertion of white supremacy after veterans returned home from World War I. White militias wanted to send a message that they were going to keep blacks in their place. So, as we leave slavery in the 1860s, we're promised certain things that we don't get. Then we're strapped with Jim Crow laws and black codes, right? In spite of all of that, we're managing to get by. We're doing what we need to do. And we're in agreement, to farm lands as sharecroppers, and they won't pay us. They won't give any sort of accounting for our income. All they wanted to do then was unionize, come together, and make sure they got what was fair, what was right, what was just. What that caused was a militia of people. And we could say that in this scenario, okay, well, the white dude shouldn't have been at that meeting. Who knows what went down, but he got shot and killed. That probably shouldn't have happened. But the bottom line is this happened in 25 cities all across the country. So it's not like this was an isolated incident where one white man got hurt and they overreacted. It happened all across the country in 25 cities, all in a couple months' time over the summer of 1919. This was a result of, look, we're doing everything to keep our foot on your throat, and you keep rising. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to have you keep rising. So all across the country, that was just one incident. 237 people lynched, swinging from trees, simply because they want to be paid for the work that they did.
And they were going to unionize.
Look, there's strength in numbers. Mm-hmm. They want to divide and conquer, and I said this repeatedly. Here in America, they want us divided and conquered. Between us and the continent, they want us divided and conquered. Black and white, they want to divide and conquer. This is more about energy, power, and money than it is anything else. And the more they can keep us splintered and fractured and at each other's throats, then they don't have any competition, because there's power in numbers, there's strength in numbers, and they didn't want that, and they still don't want it. Yeah. The next scenario we're going to share with you,
Black Wall Street. So this is a few years later.
2 years later.
Yeah, 2 years later. And many of you may have heard about Black Wall Street, and many of you may not have. I think it's only been a few years since I heard about it. I don't know. When did you hear about it?
It's been within the last 5 years that I've really come to understand what Black Wall Street was.
Yeah. So, again, Black Wall Street was a group of people that were living in Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And there was a gentleman there who, I think he was an entrepreneur, a businessman.
Actually, let me pause right there. The reason Black Wall Street came into existence was Jim Crow laws.
Yeah.
Black folks recognized that they really didn't have anywhere to fit in, which caused them to flock to Greenwood. As you hear, Cheryl's going to share the story with you, but they realized, hey, there's opportunity there. Let me go there. And then the rest of it took place. But it was because they were segregated out of everything else that they left the South seeking somewhere where they can fit in.
Right. And so basically, this one man started, he bought land, and he built, I think the first thing he built there was an African-American, I don't want to say a shelter, but a home where people can live. And it kind of grew from there. So,
ironically, he bought 40 acres.
Yeah, 40. Yeah, that's right. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, 40 acres.
40 acres.
He didn't have a mule, but he knew what to do with that 40 acres.
Right. So imagine if we all had 40 acres.
Right. This is one man with 40 acres.
Yeah. So there was all kind of shops. Everything was self-contained. Everything they needed.
I'm sorry. By the way, the man we're talking of is a freed slave.
Yes.
This brother worked himself out of slavery, got to a place where he could afford the 40 acres, and then brought the rest of the community in to build.
And that's what they did. They had their own grocery stores, their own clothing stores, barbershop, banks. They had their own bus system, taxis, everything. Everything they needed, they had within their own community. And it wasn't just wealthy black people living there. They had people who were, still working as janitors and cleaners and jobs that they had to maybe leave the community to work, but the money still came back and they spent it in Greenwood. And so I've read somewhere where it said the money stayed in the community, or the dollar stayed in the community for 19 days. This says 36 to 100 times. So basically the money stayed a long time within the community. And that's how they grew.
Yeah, that's how they grew. And I want you guys to understand how significant that piece is. This article says here at the bottom, says Greenwood residents enjoy many luxuries that their white neighbors did not. You know that's going to be a problem, and it ultimately was a problem. Then it goes on to say, including indoor plumbing and remarkable school system. The dollar circulated 36 to 100 times, taking a year for currency to leave the community. A year. If that were true, that would be the most phenomenal gathering, coming together, unionizing, working together of one community in this country that I've ever seen. Just recently, I came across some figures that says the lifespan of the dollar in the Asian community is 28 days. The lifespan of the dollar in the Jewish community is 19 days. And we also know that the Indian community is a place where they keep dollars in circulation in their community. Even though they might be here in the United States of America, that dollar circulates in their community for several days before it actually goes anywhere else. Right now, as we speak today, the dollar in the black community circulates for 6 hours before it exits. So when you look back at this and think of what one free slave did, having to purchase his 40 acres and just bringing in the rest of the community to work together, the dollar circulating, that means it's changing hands in that community 36 to 100 times and not leaving the community for a year. That's something they could never allow to last. Never allow to last. 6 hours where we're at today is what they desire.
And I think 6 hours is
probably a stretch.
Yeah, a stretch. Because we don't have, let's get back on the screen. We don't have today, like when I was younger, in the community, you'd go to a corner store and it was owned by a black family in the neighborhood I grew up in. Now, none of those stores are owned by black families. Mm-hmm. So,
and on top of not owning those local small businesses, we don't have, the Indian community, they have an area where they all support one another in their businesses. You got Little China in every major city in America, Chinatown. And we know that the Jewish community sticks together. So we don't have any hubs like that commercially, and we don't own anything in our own neighborhoods anymore. So how is a dollar to change hands even 2 or 3 times, let alone 36 to 100 times within our community before it goes somewhere else? Matter of fact, typically we get it and we out of the store going buy Nikes and whatnot. It's going somewhere else immediately. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you can make it from the paycheck to the store in less than 6 hours, it's gone. So
if you make it from the paycheck to home, it's gone.
Right.
So
that's the backdrop of Black Wall Street. This was truly Wall Street-ish. They had their own banks, hospitals, schools, grocery store. They were self-sufficient, didn't need nothing from nobody outside, to the point where it angered the white folks in Oklahoma who didn't have that.
They wanted to be separate.
Right. But even in Oklahoma, there were still Jim Crow laws. So they separated these folks and got mad because they rose faster than they did. And then that became a major problem, man. Mm-hmm. And I'll just show the next slide. And the result of them being angry that they segregated themselves out and couldn't keep up with this black community that had been put together was the very first and to my knowledge, the only ever bombs that had been dropped on a city in the United States of America. You see, the first bombs that ever fell on America fell on Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. On the left-hand side, it says the neighborhood was destroyed during a riot that broke out after a group of men from Greenwood attempted to protect a young black man from a lynch mob. In the wake of the violence, 35 city blocks lay in charred ruins. Over 800 people were treated for injuries, and estimated 300 deaths occurred.
So basically, they were trying to lynch this young man because he had been accused by, I think she was 17, a 17-year-old white girl who was an elevator operator. And she had accused him of, I don't know what she, touching her or assaulting her or something. And so from that, it turned into this.
So they attempted to lynch him. They wouldn't allow that lynching to take place. 800 people injured and 300 black folks dead behind this. But here's what I want to point out. In 1921, who had bombs? There wasn't anybody, there was no internet, people learning how to make homemade pipe bombs and all. This is the federal government that did this. There's no way, shape, or form around it. They even on the history. I looked this up on the history, what was it, History Channel, history page, whatever. They give the details of what took place there, but they don't say anything about the bombing. They bombed a U.S. city because it was black. It was made by blacks for blacks and independent of anything and everybody else. And the people around there couldn't stand it. Mm-hmm. So instead of having, any kind of fair due process for a young man who's been accused of something, they went nuts and tried to kill him. Mm-hmm. And ended up injuring 800 people and taking out 300.
Personally, I think that was just an excuse.
Of course it was.
There's too much of a history of
them calling foul.
Calling foul and...
sexually.
Yeah. Accusing black men of doing something that they didn't do. And then we later find out that it never happened. And so I just think that was just an excuse to go in.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I want you guys to see the pattern and why we said the things we said in our last video. So in 1919, you had redlining all across the country, 25 major cities, 237 people in ELAINE, Arkansas, or black people in ELAINE, Arkansas, gone. Lynched, dead. 2 years later, Black Wall Street, 300 people gone, dead. 35 blocks, city blocks destroyed, and 800 people injured. You tell us to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, but when we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, because when we fight, we win. And when that happens, these are the extremes that they go to stop it. Next scenario we're going to give you is one you may be familiar with, and we don't have to read anything to you because most of you have probably seen the movie. And that is Rosewood. And this was just a couple years later after Black Wall Street, Rosewood, Florida. The scenario in Rosewood, and it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, I would suggest you get it. Ving Rhames is one of the stars, and Don Cheadle. There was a young lady in this small town of Rosewood. It was black and white. Obviously, they had their different areas, but there was a couple hundred people that lived in this little bitty town. This white woman was having an affair with another white man. And after they had a little session, he got up, put his pants on, was ready to bounce. She's a married white woman, and she's upset, like, where are you going? He's like, I got to go back to work. So she gets mad with him, pushes him or whatever, and he goes to whooping her behind something fierce. Lumped her up, bruised her up really, really bad, to the point where now you got to come up with something. You have your husband come home, see your face and your body bruised up like this, and not tell him something. So before her husband gets home, she runs out in the street and screams. Well, she screams foul. I'm not going to say what she said, but she blamed it on a white man.
A black man.
Excuse me. She blamed it on a black man and said that a black man had beaten her. Everybody assumed she had been beaten and raped. She literally said, no, I have not been raped. They ran with the beaten and raped story and basically, wiped out several black folks in this community. Had to sneak all of the kids, all of the black kids out of this town on a train. The numbers range from 35 people dead to as many as 150 people dead, simply because this woman was foul. She was dirty. She was cheating on her husband and had to think up an excuse she can give that people would latch on to. And she gave it. And the funny thing is, the first person to really talk to her was the sheriff. And he knew deep down in his heart that this woman was foul. But he ran with that story for as long as he could run with the story, till it just got to be too much, and then he called it what it is. She knows she ain't right. She's a cheater. She foul. She's wrong. And so he's like, I don't believe this for a second. But by that time, all hell had broken loose. Every black person in this community was fleeing for their lives, literally. Now, this scenario, this story starts off with Ving Rhames coming into an auction for some land and outbidding some white folks for this land. And everybody in the area like, who's this dude? Where did he get this kind of money from? And blah, 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 blah. What it says is, once again, when we fight, we win. Regardless of the circumstances, black folks have always risen. We always find a way. Even in spite of these things, we still have millionaires and billionaires like Byron Allen, who's on this clip that we're going to attach to this, who have risen above all of this foolishness. But the extremes that what do you call it, baby? The underbelly of this country, and what this nation has truly been founded on, hasn't gone anywhere.
It's racial terrorism.
Absolutely, racial terrorism.
That's what it is.
And but it was racial terrorism at Cape Coast.
Yeah.
In Elmina, in Asimanso, it was racial terrorism in the Middle Passage. It was racial terrorism during slavery. It has been racial terrorism ever since. To the point where you got these Jews, walking up and down Charlottesville trying to be Nazis. You will not replace us. Okay. The extremes that they're willing to go to, though, to make sure that they are not replaced. We don't want you to unionize. We won't let you be a part of our community, but if your community is doing better than ours, we will bomb that nest. And on the word of one foul woman, we will destroy a whole community of black people because y'all doing too good.
And that thinking is still here because of Charlottesville. That was just a couple of years ago.
Absolutely.
And these white nationalists, Nazi-minded people, feeling like they don't want to be replaced. They don't want to see anybody have anything that they feel belongs to them.
Rightfully theirs, right.
And so that's still here. That hasn't gone anywhere. And so to think that this was so many years ago and it wouldn't happen today is a false sense of security, I think.
Well, think about it. 1919, you had redlining. 1921, Red Summer, 1919. Black Wall Street, 1921. Rosewood, 1923. All of these were black folks pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. But in 1967, Martin's still speaking to the fact that, look, man, there's two Americas. There are two Americas, and we're coming to get our check. A year later, he's gone. Mm-hmm. Folks, that's in our lifetime or just prior to our lifetime for just speaking to the two Americas and saying, y'all, there's a debt that is owed and we coming to get a check.
You know what? You just reminded me of when Barack Obama won the election and Michelle gave her speech and she made that statement about this is the first time that I'm proud of my country. Mm-hmm. White folks got hot.
Yes.
How dare you say that this is the first time that you've been proud of this country? And that has to do with they don't understand or care not to think about that there's two different Americas.
Absolutely. That was the first time that the masses in this country have come together and stood up for something that wasn't white.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. First time it has ever happened.
Right.
Just because you have a couple of black mayors in major cities and black...
and Oprah.
Right. and you're going to hear on this clip that we're about to share with you, they tried to stop Oprah from getting where she's at. They don't want anybody of color paralleling them on an equal playing field with them. So when she said what she said, this is the first time ever, well, in the history that they teach us, that this country has come together to actually support something that wasn't white or someone who wasn't white, and elevate them above everybody else. Basically, president's the most powerful position in the country, probably in the world. To put anybody of color in that position is something that had not been done in this country. So that's
they took offense. They took offense to her saying it's the first time that she's been proud of a country, and you don't have to be proud of a country to love your country. Yeah, there's a difference. Yes, and for her and her family to go through the struggles and the challenges of a campaign season to become the president, you don't do that unless you have some, you really got to value what it is you're seeking. But that don't mean you got to be proud of all this foolishness. Who's proud of what we just shared with you? Right. Why would anybody be proud of how this country started, the slavery that took place, and what's been done since then? There's nothing to be proud of. When you don't have to think about that stuff because it doesn't impact you on a daily basis, it doesn't exist in your world. When you're privileged. Yeah, so. I get that. But hopefully, maybe, this video will shed some light to people who feel that way. Who felt like she said that, like, this country don't mean nothing. No, it means everything to me, but this country has not stood up on principle like this ever in her lifetime, and she's right. And now we're experiencing the backlash of that. Yeah, absolutely. They weren't ready for that. They weren't ready for a black man to be president, which is why we ended up with a Donald Trump, which is why we're in the situation, why you got people marching in Charlottesville now. But I want to link together the things that happened in the early 1900s that we just shared with you with what Martin was saying about two different Americas, and we're coming to get our check because you've heard me stumble and say, I meant to say red summer and say redlining a couple times in this video. Most people don't know what redlining is, and they don't know what Martin was talking about when he said that they were willing to undergird their white peasants with funding. They were willing to give them teaching and give them land and all kinds of different things that we didn't have access to. That is a process known as redlining. So I'm going to read to you from Wikipedia a little bit of what it says redlining is, because it's still going on today. And you're going to hear it in this clip that we're putting at the end of this. The link in the description. It's going to talk a little bit, not Charlemagne, but the other cat is talking about access to funding. We don't have access to funding, period. But it says in the United States and Canada, redlining is a systemic denial of various services to residents of specific, often racially associated neighborhoods or communities, either directly or through the selective raising of prices. While the best known examples of redlining have involved denial of financial services such as banking or insurance, other services such as health care or even supermarkets have been denied to residents. So what redlining is and what's taking place in this country is black folks haven't had access to capital. First of all, they didn't give us the land that they promised us, but they gave it to white folks who didn't go through what we went through. That's not fair. That's not balanced. Then they said, even for these people like in these communities that we're just sharing with you, Rosewood, Tulsa, Arkansas, ELAINE, Arkansas, they are pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, but we're not going to allow you to have mortgages. We're not going to lend to you. Oh, okay, well, we'll lend to you, but there's not going to be an insurance company who will insure that mortgage, which means you can't keep that mortgage. If we deprive you of these things, we deprive you of wealth. The majority of wealth gained in this country has been gained through real estate.
through land acquisition and transferring of that through the generations. Mm-hmm. All the way up until the time Martin was talking about, he's saying, we're coming to get our check because we still don't have access to those things. And I'll say this, even back in the mortgage business, I was in the mortgage business from 98 to 2008. The predatory lending that took place during the mortgage boom was insane. Subprime lenders were targeting black communities with people who had a paper credit and putting them in crappy loans just because they could. Because we haven't had that education. We don't have that experience of being a paper credit and knowing what we just don't have that. We haven't had those experiences throughout the century, so they can target us, and we're just happy to get a mortgage, right? So you get a garbage mortgage, then they blow the economy up, and they snatch your property back in foreclosure, and then we bail out the banks. Who does that make sense to? Yes, that affected everybody, but
disproportionately.
The targeting disproportionately affected Black and Latinos. They went after people of color, and it's been documented. Look it up, Google it. It has been documented all over the place. During the mortgage boom, there was predatory lenders all over the place. A lot of big banks got fined a lot of money for doing just that. That's just another form of redlining that's been around since the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. If you deny people access, if you separate them and give them everything that is inferior, and if you go to extremes to punish them for success, how do you get ahead?
Right.
How's it supposed to be an equal playing field?
And so, in a practical sense, what were they doing? Like, so you have African American communities in certain sections, so they went by like zip codes. We know that these areas are Black people.
Well, they were specifically in the beginning when they wouldn't give loans. They were seriously red lines drawn. Mm-hmm. So redlining meant in this area you can't do loans. Banks couldn't do loans even if they wanted to. You couldn't do insure loans in these areas. It was they would pick a community of poor people, typically poor Black people, draw a red line around it, and insurance services, mortgage services, we don't do those there. So I don't have land. I'm trying to at least don't have land to farm because that's what that was intended for. Give us an economic base, as Martin was saying. They didn't give us that economic base, so we had to fight, claw, scratch, do what we had to do to get to a place where we can now at least get a piece of property for ourselves and our families. And now you won't lend to me and you won't insure me. How the heck an evil plan for that's a joke. That's an absolute joke. Anybody says you need to pull yourself, like Martin said, he said it's pretty cruel to tell somebody without boots to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Just because some of us have done it doesn't mean that's the norm. That is so abnormal, it's not even funny. And every time they do what they can to pull the rest of us up, there are extremes that they go to stop that. When you see this clip, you'll see what I'm talking about. I'm anxious to see how this plays out for Byron Allen. This brother's addressing something very publicly in a way that, look, we're about to see something happen in the Supreme Court that has never happened in the history of this country. I'm not going to spoil it for you. I want you to hear who's going to be arguing in the Supreme Court in this case. It'll blow your mind. And what they're arguing over will blow your mind. I didn't realize until I watched that clip that the first civil rights laws were put on the books in 1866. I didn't know there were civil rights laws back that far. I think back to the civil rights era, the 50s and 60s. 1866 were the first laws put on the books. And what I'm here to tell you, and I'm not without giving it away, is those laws are at risk right now and will be before the Supreme Court in a case that will blow your mind. I can't even explain it. Just watch the clip. And then when we get back together, we will talk about what's going on now. Mm-hmm. That clip is a good example of what is going on right now.
Make America great again.
Make America white again. That's there was no other translation for that from this administration. They want to roll it back, and I mean roll it all the way back. And we got to wake up. We got to understand what's going on. You got to pay attention. Even this clip that we're going to share with you, I didn't know about it. Somebody else sent it to me, and then another person dropped it in our Jamestown to Jamestown group. All these people who just went to Ghana, somebody dropped it in there. We need to spread the word. People need to know what is going on. You have to watch this clip. You got to know that your rights, as far back as 1866, are in jeopardy right now.
Watch the video and share it.
Yeah, absolutely, with everybody. If you, especially if you're in America, you need to watch this clip. You need to share it. All right. I think that's about it for today. I'm going to take my handsome self and go watch some football.
Bye, guys.
All right. You guys have a good one.